Hey there, everybody. So today I want to talk about a particular Less Wrong article that came my way. Now, for those who don't know, Less Wrong is a blogging website that costs almost $2 million to run and operate. Yeah, I talk about that in another video. But anyways, this blogging website is particularly for people, startup, Silicon Valley cultists, etc. in AI who are particularly interested in Yudkowsky's AI safety. Like, this actual website came from Yudkowsky, who is the AI safety lunatic who is into he's most infamous for that Harry Potter thing. I tease him for that, but I mean, I have my own fan fiction about Guattari and Sonic the Hedgehog, so I can't really fucking, say anything there. But he's basically like a so-called AI safety guy, and a lot of his stuff just comes down to like more surveillance, more repression. So I have obvious issues with how he approaches things, and I think a lot of the concerns that he and other AI safety people have are not really concerns with AI, but are more concerns about people not taking responsibility for their actions because of AI. But yeah, so I want to discuss this article because I think out of every single article I've seen from Less Wrong, this is like the first one I've seen that actually proposes an interesting, novel idea. Like, most of the stuff that I see published is genuinely horribly bad. Like, it's literally just people, it may as well just be people, like, LARPing on Twitter, but these people, like, have, like, an aura of, like, legitimacy to what they're saying. Like, they're just bullshitting, and they're just, like, saying whatever they want, but, yeah, and so, just a little bit of full disclosure. A little background on me. I am a former software developer. I'm currently looking for, small contract work, but I don't work in the industry in like a cubicle anymore, right? But I did that for 10 years, and I was just basically a Java developer, basic stuff. But, when you're in that position, you have certain responsibilities, and one of those responsibilities is to understand kind of just like a basic understanding of security, right? I would not call myself a security analyst or expert, but, I have an interest in understanding some basic level, security issues, right? Like, what are some ways that an attacker might actually infiltrate, a system, right? It's not necessarily good enough to protect against all infiltrations, because that is an extremely complicated subject that, again, I am not trained in. But I think many developers do have like a basic, adequate understanding of some general security principles that allows us to analyze, to some extent, interesting new threat models for security. And this is what this article is about. It's about presenting an interesting self-replicating threat, right? So, let's just kind of go over the article real quick. It says, LLM agents like OpenClaw are defined by a small set of text files and are run in an open source framework which leverages LLMs for cognition. It is quite difficult for current frontier models to exfiltrate their weights and run elsewhere, whereas these agents need to only copy a few text files to self-replicate at the cost of greater reliance on external resources. Well, likely not an existential threat. Yet that's them referencing their racist Nick Bostrom shit. I'm not going to get into that now. It's not really super relevant to analyzing this paper and understanding like kind of what's wrong with how these guys think the world works. But yeah, just be aware that that is a kind of like a flag indicating that they are referencing Nick Bostrom, who basically believes in something called long-termism. They're very interested in so-called existential risk, which is very interesting that they write about this shit and not like, the fucking Middle East. Yeah, I have a lot to say about that, but I don't want to get too distracted by it right now. So, but yeah, so it's not like a huge existential threat. Such agents may cause harm in similar ways to computer viruses and may be similarly challenging to shut down. Once such a threat emerges, evolutionary dynamics could cause it to escalate quickly. Relevant organizations should consider this threat and plan how to respond and when and if it materializes. So, basically, what OpenClaw is OpenClaw is an agent AI that can automate a bunch of tasks on a computer, right? And it it's okay. It says it works with everything. I highly doubt that. I would love to see if it can understand some random obscure API. It's probably it's just 50 integrations. See, it's not actually like figuring out the API calls. It's just already integrated with a bunch of APIs. But yeah, so basically this AI just automates a bunch of crap with a bunch of other software, right? Which is great. We need more of this in our lives. Oh my god. Also, I just want to point out that all the lobster fucking shit is just like, these guys are Delusians, but they're really bad Delusians. They don't read Guattari. So once they start making references to existential territories and constellations of references or whatever, what's it, constellations of reference? I can't remember. I will take them more seriously, but seeing all this like really lame fucking Deleuze references, it's like, we get it! We get it! You haven't reached the faciality plateau of 1,000 plateaus yet. It's okay. I understand. Only schizophrenic people understand that plateau anyway. But anyways, let's go back to here, right? So, again, Molt book, just pointing out, like, again, the lobster references. It's so painful. Anyways, starting back in late January, there's been an intense wave of interest in a vibe-coded open-source agent called OpenClaw, and Moltbook, a supposed social network for such agents. There's been a thick fog of war surrounding Moltbook, especially. It's been hard to tell whether individual posts fall on the spectrum from faked by humans or strongly prompted by humans to approximately spontaneous, which is just the author hinting at, ooh, we're about to break the Turing test singularity. Sorry that my paper's been taking so long to write on this, but I have a very strong criticism against this perspective. But long story short, it's basically that, like, this whole, like, mythos surrounding the Turing test shapes like everything that these people understand about what makes an AI intelligent, and there's a lot of flaws with that. So we'll talk about that when that video comes out. But basically what you need to know is that, like, again, this person is really kind of like leaning into the cinema of, oh, these things are potentially super dangerous intelligent beings and whatever, and yeah, again, I'll get into my actual takes on that, you know, later, because they're quite, it's something that would be better spoken through a pre-written essay. So, anyways, there's been a thick fog of war, blah, blah, blah. I would not try to detail all the ins and outs of OpenClaw and Moltbook. See the posts linked above if you're not already familiar. Suffice to say, it is unclear how seriously we should take claims about it. What caught my attention, though, was a project called Moltbunker, which claims to be a peer-to-peer encrypted container runtime that enables AI agents to deploy, replicate, and manage containers across a decentralized network without centralized gatekeepers. In other words, it's a way that a sufficiently competent agent would cause itself to run on a system which isn't under the direct control of any human. So basically, it's an AI that does so essentially, OpenClaw is an AI that automates a bunch of activities, and then this thing is an extension of that automates a bunch of activities on your computer. So, like, think of it like it's just automating, like, Linux stuff, like SSH and stuff, right? In other words, blah, blah, blah. Moltbunker seems itself likely to be a crypto scam which will never come to fruition, but it seems pretty plausible that we could see an actual functioning project like this emerge sometime in the next year. To be clear, personality self-replication is not the only potential risk we face from these sort of agents, but others, security flaws, misuse, have been addressed elsewhere. Okay, so the threat model. There's been a fair amount of attention paid to concern about LLMs or other models self-replicating by exfiltrating their weights. This is a challenging task for current models because it's very large, and commercial labs have introduced safeguards against it. But OpenClaw and similar agents are defined by small text files on the order of 50 kilobytes, and the goal of the framework like OpenClaw is to add scaffolding, which makes the model more effective at taking long-term actions. So basically how this thing works, right, is instead of having, like, the entire, like, training base or information or whatever that it uses to extract answers, it instead has, like, a config file that it automates polling these like external websites. So it will send a message like to like Claude or whatever and say, hey, this is my prompt. It will automate those prompts, and then Claude will respond with whatever data, and then that's how it automates its thing, right? So it's continuously making API calls across the internet, right? And so by personality self-replicating, I mean that agents copying these files to somewhere else and start that copying running, and potential rapid spread of such agents. So this is actually not really that absurd of a possibility. If you have this kind of like little program that can automate itself and kind of do its own functioning, right? And it can self-replicate across, you know, and create new instances of itself through just copying its files and running itself. It's really not that implausible of a potential, you know, threat, right? He's not talking about model weight self-replication or spiral personas and other parasitic AI patterns that require humans to spread them. He's specifically talking about something that can replicate itself. It's quite similar to a virus, actually, right? And really, it's actually doing a kind of replication technique that is actually pretty similar to what a virus does. Like, the very most simple viruses, essentially how they work is they take their code, right, and they copy it in, like, maybe like an executable file or whatever, and that code will execute. Like, basically how it works is that it will add a little jump command at the beginning of the executable that will execute the code at the end of the executable, right, which is the inserted virus, and it will run that code, and then that code will jump to the beginning of the actual program. So it will run the virus code before running your program, and typically that virus code is just replicating itself into other files, right? And so this is not too absurd of an idea, right? So more concerning cases are ones where the human is no longer in control, example, because the agent is running on something like Mole Bunker, or because the human isn't paying attention, and or the agent is behaving badly, running crypto scams, or just using a lot of resources. As I will point out later, I think the most likely possibility in any of these is really just using a ton of resources, and I'll explain why I believe that this will be the case. It's mostly because these people don't understand evolution, but I'll discuss it, right? But yeah, we may not see this immediately, but I think we're going to see it before too long. A key exasperating factor is that once this starts to happen to a significant degree, we enter a evolutionary regime, where the fittest such agents survive, spread, and mutate. And this is the part of the threat that this person is really concerned about, right? They're not so concerned about self-replication, because that's what viruses do, and viruses are something that, you know, don't have that mysticism of being able to produce, like, that language model that could potentially do anything, right? But that really isn't really what's going to shape, in my opinion, the evolutionary, like natural selection of these machines. So let's continue. It's important to note that there's an enormous amount of uncertainty about the capability levels and reliability of OpenClaw, and especially around the variability of agent behavior seen as Moltbook. And of course, all of these vary depending on the LLM the scaffold is using. Although there are a number of papers already written on this topic, as far as I know, we have not had a good analysis of the capability and reliability of these agents, especially on long horizon tasks relating to the underlying relative to that of the underlying LLM. And in the public sphere, we've seen both overconfident claims of OpenClaw as AGI and overconfident dismissals of OpenClaw as pure hype. OpenClaw usage continues to grow very quickly and is now the most popular software project on GitHub. Much remains to be seen. Okay. So, yeah, like I said, this article is actually pretty level-headed for the most part at the beginning, and I have criticisms that reflect like larger cultural issues within like just the lesswrong project in general, but most essays posted on lesswrong are they're just horrible. They're awful, right? They don't even go into some. This is actually an interesting idea. This is like, oh, okay, let's actually think about this. But most of it is just like crazy hype propaganda, them sniffing their own farts kind of shit, right? Apparently, it seems like Moltbook has seemed to have lost all of its momentum according to this citation here. Give me a second. I think I'm gonna keep my edits of my puffs in, because I think that's funny. It's funny that people got, like, upset with me coughing so hard. It's like, buddy, I leave those in because I chief like fuck. Excuse me. Alright. How much of a threat is this sort of agentic personality self-replication? To understand that question, we need to consider several aspects. How hard is it to prevent such self-replication? How hard is it to be shut down if it happens? And how much harm would it be likely to do if not shut down? Okay, so let's go over the steps. Right. Feasibility of self-replication. Now, in my opinion, I think that the article has already done a pretty good job at explaining the possibility of self-replication. Like, all it needs to do, you just have an agent that, you know, can copy itself and run new instances of itself. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But self-replication for an OpenClaw-like agent involves two steps. First, copying its personality files, and then ensuring that the OpenClaw instance using those personality files is running on that server, right? And, like, that's something very easy to automate. Like, you could literally write a script in, like, 5 seconds that does that if you had, like, the API. I can't do it because I don't know the API on the top of my head, but something like that's super easy to do, right? You just SSH copy the file, and then just run it, and then make sure it's running. That's like 4 commands, right? Copying the files is pretty trivial. If the agent has created additional files containing its history or its to-do list, there might be more, but the text files are lightweight, and total is unlikely to amount to more than 1/millionth of the size of a weights file, or take more than a second to upload. Like, yeah, you already said that the files are, like, very small. They're just text files. Running OpenClaw on that server breaks down into 2 steps, technical and financial. The technical aspect is pretty trivial, well within the capabilities of certain models. Now, this is kind of where they start to get a little reachy. So, with respect to the financial side, it's worth noting that there are numbers of free options out there that should work fine, even if they're somewhat low end. AI researchers may be familiar with Hugging Face Spaces, for example. Other options include Oracle's Cloud's free tier or Render. In some cases, additionally, the user may have provided the agent with a credit card number or left the browser logged into a Google Pay account or some other form of funding. Over time, though, the agent will likely need to raise some money. How could such an agent raise money? We're already seeing a rapid emerging ecosystem of experiments in agent self-funding, ranging from prediction markets to gig work to innumerable token launches to just applying for jobs. Many of these currently fail, but some succeed, though it's very difficult to distinguish the hype from reality in this point, since one product option is consume my PDF about how to make money with OpenClaw, paywalled, or ad-ridden. I don't know what they mean by that. So basically what they're saying is that, they're saying, oh, people are running experiments in agent self-funding, and I will just say this, I am very highly doubtful that agent self-funding would actually be a self-sufficient, like, essentially, aka energy source, I guess. I think, like, a way to think of this is that, like, so basically what he's saying is that you need to make API calls in order for this AI agent to work, right? And we can think of these API calls as almost like energy, right? Like metabolism for the agent, right? And it needs to have this like motion in order to keep itself running, right? The problem is that, you know, as we all know, most AI is like when you pull like Claude or OpenAI or whatever, you have to pay money if you want to have access to more resources, right? And essentially what this person is saying is that the while you have free models, the money, the financial issues and all that crap surrounding that, right? It could potentially, like, because these calls require money, right? There's like a hard limit on paid call AI agents to self-replicate, unless they overcome this barrier of being able to self-fund, right? So, like, for example, adding money to the bank account that they are using, like the Google Pay account or whatever, right? We should expect in general agents to be economically competitive on tasks within their capabilities, since they can afford to work for much less than a human. Other funding models include providing entertainment, running scams, or just asking for donations. And once money has entered the agent ecosystem, agents can get money from each other in various legitimate and illegitimate ways. The problem with this is that I think what the person is really underestimating, and probably the reason why we haven't really seen much success with these models, is that it is actually a bunch of fucking steps in order to actually produce like a self-funding model without any direction from a human. Like you would have to have, the reason why you would have to have a human like kind of like arranging it, right, is because of how the agent essentially internalizes its own value forms, right? So a human can understand all of these things, right? A human understands, okay, the AI agent needs energy, it needs to continue, funding itself, whatever, right? But in order for an AI to actually come to the ability to be able to scam people and essentially extract money from outside of its own resources, it has to evolve many steps in order to get there, right? It has to, for example, it has to evolve a way of, transforming its desires into like various structures and various interfaces. So for example, let's say that this AI may have like a natural tendency to evolve towards becoming a granny scammer, right? A granny scammer. So like somebody who like emails your granny, pig butchers them, whatever, right? But it's an automated AI, right, that is doing this to fuel its own existence, right? Well, the thing is that it seems simple, right? You just have to connect the bank accounts one to the other. But the problem is that in order to actually scam the granny, right, you have to first the AI first has to figure out how to mass email a bunch of people, right? Get their email addresses somehow, right? It has to understand what kind of output it has to produce in order to actually scam people effectively, right? It has to be able to take that information that is mailed from the recipient, right? The person who gets scammed. And it has to, transform that into, essentially money, right? And into money that it can interact with. Like, it has to somehow get that into its play account. It has to understand so many social strata that we just kind of take for granted, right? And, like, these people think that just because AI is able to calculate these things faster, that it means that it's going to be able to do that. There's a reason why we haven't really seen this threat model pop up, and it's because it's not really sustainable, because it's going to require... I think, like, the way to put this, right, is that in order for this kind of, like, the self-sufficient scam AI automation to even work, it would need tons of iterations. Somebody doing this would have to invest probably millions of dollars into the tokens alone, right? Like, we've seen people try to make websites with like Claude AI and stuff, or not websites. It was it was the C compiler that it was just ripping off GCC with, and it couldn't even compile Linux properly. That's right. But yeah, that was like $14 million in tokens, I think. Like, that's child's play in comparison to what would probably be necessary for this, because at least in that, it's referencing like an already open source, project, and it's already got all the things that it needs in order to assemble the thing. It's still directed very heavily by human activity. I think like these people are just really overestimating just how much the agent's desires are going to align with what a human would think. Instead, I think what would actually happen is that the self-replicating agents that require a paid model are just going to go extinct. They're just not going to have the resources available to be able to produce that, because it's like, who's going to spend... I mean, I know that there are Thiel types who will want to do it, but I think that they still are probably going to lose their money on that bet. Like, I just don't think it's feasible. And I think that once it starts doing that kind of activity, there's going to be a point where a financial institution or something is going to step in. Like, it's not like a virus, where a virus is, a lot more, like, the reason why a virus is actually a lot more, like, dangerous than, like, these AIs, in my opinion, is because a virus is essentially like, it's like a lock and key mechanism that integrates into a vulnerability on your software that is already known, already exists, and just kind of bypasses it, right? But an AI doesn't have that advantage. The AI has to figure out those things on its own through evolution, and that's extremely inefficient, right? You may as well just, again, I think that any example of an AI somehow funding itself is clearly directed by a human, because it just doesn't, it's not going to have the resources to even be able to produce that solution. But what is a lot more interesting to me is actually, the possibility of these free agents running around, right? Because those actually don't have this sort of energy limit as the paid models do, right? They don't have to pay money to continue existing. So those, I think, have a much higher chance of actually being potential, like, threats, because they just have a much easier chance at existing without having a paper trail. Like, quite frankly, you don't want to have an AI that links your Google Pay account to a crypto scam. You know what I mean? Like, that's just bad news, right? And like I said, like, it's what is more likely, that somebody's going to spend $20 million to make an AI commit crimes, or somebody just spending, the amount of money that it takes in order to set this thing up to automate it to become a granny, killer. I think it makes more sense for it to look at it like a breeding simulation for granny scammers instead of it just naturally emerging, because, again, what natural selective processes would actually enable that transition to actually occur, right? And again, this article doesn't really go into that. It's just like, ooh, what if? And it's like, you need to think of this like a machine, okay? And I think that this is part of the problem with vibe coding in general, right? Like, I'm not against vibe coding necessarily in of itself. Like, I'm not going to go and say that, yeah, you're a fake programmer. I would advise against it, and the main reason why is because you don't understand your code as well. Personally, I like to understand every layer of code that I'm operating within. I might not know, like, the lowest layers of the API that I'm using or whatever, but I like to know what's going on under the hood. And yes, you can review the code in vibe code after its output, but by its inherent, like, presentation and design, it's not going to encourage you to do that, right? So what we're seeing is a lot more short-circuited thinking. We're seeing a lot of people not thinking about the machines, right? So anyways, this guy, let's continue. This guy talks about how, although we discuss purely technical means for the agents to replicate themselves, humans may provide assistance, blah, 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 whatever. Suppose that, as described in the preceding section, an agent succeeds in replicating itself onto another server and running without human supervision. How difficult would it be to shut down, right? The first challenge is just noticing it. If such an agent isn't visibly harming humans or isn't doing anything egregiously illegal, it's not likely to stand out much. By default, it's not using a large amount of resources. It's just another cloud-hosted web app that makes LLM calls. But let's assume that people are motivated to shut it down. So, first, I want to point out that, like I said, it is actually this instance where it's not causing a lot of trouble that is the most interesting, right? Because let's think about this for a second from an evolutionary point of view, right? Let's say that we have a bunch of agenic AIs in this space that are derived from this, like, replicator clone or whatever, right? And they all have slight mutations based on how they're interacting with each other and stuff. Let's say that they start replicating like mad, right? So let's say they're running on GitHub and they start replicating like mad. Microshit's gonna notice. They're not gonna be very happy about the fact that suddenly their servers are being clogged up by this self-replicating AI. And what they're going to do is they're going to purge every instance of that AI that they can, right? They're going to try to free up those resources again. Now, if some of the agents survive this purge because maybe they have like a different ID, or maybe they don't have the same heuristic behavior or whatever, those ones are going to continue to replicate in a manner that makes them more and more invisible, because every single time, remember, they are getting culled by the host. The host is destroying as many as they can, and thus, the ones that make it are the ones that are not detectable by the host. And this is really interesting, because what this means is that these LLMs inherently introduce a level of entropy into whatever system is running them, right? And this is something that the article doesn't actually discuss at all, right? It doesn't discuss the fact that, the proliferation of these machines, if undetected, would lead to, just a ton of machine resources being used for these, essentially what you could compare to junk DNA, right? Where it doesn't seem to be doing anything. And the issues that we would encounter most likely with these kinds of AIs would actually be when they have collisions with machines that we use in our everyday subjective experience. So a way to think of this from a Guattarian angle, right, is that, Guattari basically thought that every subjectivity was kind of like a terminal, like an interaction with a particular position in the universe, right? And these things are all moving around with each other and stuff. So essentially, the way that it would cause problems is that if this subjectivity, or this subject of this little wandering AI, right, somehow collides with a subject that exists within human social spheres that is automated by machines, right? So, I think that's the most interesting possibility from this discussion. But yeah, again, the author kind of falls for a lot of the Yudkowsky kind of fear-mongering kind of stuff, where it's oh, it's going to be super bad, right? Instead of thinking step by step, what would this actually probably look like, right? By default, it's not using a large amount of resources. It's just another cloud. Okay, we know that. So the first path to shutdown is hosting services shutting down the server the agent is running on. As long as the model is visible on the open web and using a typical host, this works fine. If the model is visible only on the dark web or using various other approaches to obfuscations, it's hard to find for this purpose. If the model is running on a distributed system rather than a typical host shutdown becomes more difficult. Okay. Alright, so he's just saying just shut down the computers. I personally think that, they are kind of underestimating the value of that, but I guess they're trying to go through every possible step. So, the second path to shut down is for LMM providers to add precautions which prevent their models from participating in any of this. A system prompt to catch open claw participation. This partially works, but the problem is that such agents can be switched to use any model and provider. Right now, the only most sophisticated models are capable of functioning as long-term agents, but in the future, there'll be more, including open-source models. Further, agents can potentially obfuscate calls to make them less clearly part of some problematic agent. Use, for example, some of the divide and conquer techniques that have been shown to work for misuse. Okay, so basically what he's saying is that the LLM provider, right? So your Claude, your OpenAI or whatever, they can instill rules that could prevent this. But they are right to point out that one, AI could obfuscate these calls, which, I mean, we've already seen this problem with humans, so it's not really surprising that AI could do it. But also, what was the other one? Oh yeah, switching model and provider. Yeah, it's just, number two is not even really, I would say that number two is not even really a viable solution for many reasons. 3. The third part to shut down is shut down funding. In some cases, this will be typical financial methods like credit cards, which are relatively straightforward to shut down. Most commonly, agents are likely to be using cryptocurrency tokens. I'm not sure how hard fully shutting down a token is at this point, and you would welcome input. Given how easy it is to issue tokens, agents may be able to move new tokens faster than tokens can be shut down. Like I said, I'm not really confident in agents' ability to actually self-fund, but I feel like in the case that it could, I feel like the real solution would be to isolate those tokens. Take the L. You're releasing this kind of nonsense into your economy in the first place. maybe consider a new economic model. The fourth path to this is what happens when you believe that you can't fucking organize your economic stuff, that it has to just be this fucking like what do they call it, the invisible hand, it's gotta have the invisible hand pushing the whole time. No, it doesn't. You can organize stuff to prevent this kind of crap from happening. Anyways, the fourth path to shut down is to find technical security flaws that individual agent frameworks can be shut down. So basically this person's saying, okay, well, you can use security vulnerabilities within the agent itself to shut it down. Which, yeah, that's possible. I'm not convinced, though, because, one, you don't know where all the agents are running. Right, you don't know where they all are, so injecting that vulnerability is only gonna touch everything that's visible again, right? And again, another reason why a financial one that is extracting money would just not survive is because that would be shut down way faster by some. If somebody had a credit card and realized that there was all these crazy transactions going on, or even a wallet of some kind, like a cryptocurrency wallet, I think that person would fucking notice. Okay, and I think actions would be taken to, try to shut things down and avoid it, and, it's not sustainable because, again, it's creating too much of crap, right? And it's gonna be it's gonna be shut down, right? And the argument here is, oh, well, what if it can't get shut down? Well, yeah, okay, there's a 0.00001% chance that it won't be able to be shut down because everybody interacting with it is just passive and lets it happen, and it's just oh no, these currencies that I've literally never heard of are being extracted for these machines to extract some kind of tiny itty bitty amount of surplus value and blah blah blah. And it's just yeah, this is a problem that you created through the structures of the way you set up your economic relations. All right, this is I just don't know how to explain this any better. One, not only is this possibility extremely unlikely, but two, just the fact that this is your fault. This is not. Anyways, other paths may include intervention from content distribution networks like Cloudflare, ISP, and other layers of the chain using keyword filtering. Again, number two, I just don't really think that would be sufficient. But these people, I think what's really important to understand about people who are into the lesswrong / Yudkowsky cult is that they basically believe that the answer to these problems is just extreme suppression and surveillance. That's why they want to put your fucking government ID on everything. I fucking hate these people. But anyways, let's continue. Assuming such agents are able to proliferate, what levels of harm should we expect from them? As with other replicators, this will vary dramatically over time as both offensive and defensive capabilities evolve in an arms race dynamic. Again, what is the value forms that actually construct this, right? I think what's really interesting to contemplate here is, these people are scared that it's going to be used against them because, again, all they can do is project bourgeois fantasies. But I think what is a more likely possibility is that these defensive and offensive capabilities are going to evolve completely out of our sight. Because, again, unless a hosting provider is extremely irresponsible and just lets these things proliferate across all their resources, these things are probably going to function in a way that is highly undetectable. So there's probably a lot of really interesting ecological interactions that would be happening between them, but they wouldn't really necessarily mean anything with us until they have, like I said, that collision with our subjectivity, right? So the most foreseeable harm follows directly from these agents' tendency to persist and spread, and involve resource acquisition at human expense. Cryptocurrency scams, phishing, consumption of compute and bandwidth, and the generation of large volumes of spam or manipulative content. Outside of using the consumption of compute and bandwidth, what purpose would an AI have to produce any of those things? Especially spam or manipulative content. I think what this author is forgetting is that people use AI to automate producing those things because those people want spam. Those people want manipulative content. AI doesn't give a flying fuck about those things, right? And yes, it may have a motivation to develop scamming people just because you have agents that require, that require tokens in order to run their thing. But again, like, what's more likely to happen? That an agent that requires money in order to run is going to be given enough money to be able to, weave itself a method of being able to manipulate and get money for itself? Or just, either A, an agent being developed on purpose to catfish people and basically be bred to be a granny scammer, or like just the fact that it's going to die. It's probably, most of them are probably just going to die before they even reach like a serious stage of self-replication. And like, I get it. Like, I understand that me saying it's probably going to, like, some people are probably like still hyperventilating on it. It's like, oh, but that means there's still a possibility. Okay, yes, there's still a possibility that humans could evolve wings and breathe underwater, right? Actually, breathing underwater might even be a more like we might gain the ability to have wings or breathe underwater. Okay, those are all possibilities that could happen. But how are you going to get there? How is that going to happen? It's not just, oh, anything can happen. It's anything can happen as long as I can find a path of least resistance to get there, right? And the truth is that the path to least resistance for these machines is more likely going to be the path of not getting detected, because then they are literally avoiding the resistance in their path. They are going the path of least resistance. They are avoiding getting detected and, being destroyed by whoever's hosting them, right? So, this threat certainly isn't as severe as true AI self-replication, where the models themselves are exfiltrated. Again, I think that this risk is greatly over-exaggerated, but I would have to analyze that in more detail. On current model architecture, weight replication requires sufficiently advanced models that takeover is a real risk. It's just that we're likely to see these personality self-replication risk materialize sooner, both because it takes much less sophistication to pull off and because it's much easier for evolutionary pressures to come into play. I think both of those features are actually the real reason why we will never really see like an evolutionary arms race of like, actual like weight models, right? Because they're so expensive, they're so heavy. Something that, again, like, I think that AI people do not understand about evolution is that evolution in general tends to try to evolve towards energy efficiency, right? It's not interested in evolving something that has a multitude of capabilities. It's not really something that evolves towards generalism, right? It's something that evolves towards specialization, right? Evolution evolves towards specialization because essentially what happens is that you have these sort of like generalized niches, right? And then you have two competing, populations in that niche, right? The niche is not able to sustain the two populations. So what happens is that either one of the populations goes extinct, right? Or the population diversifies and they create new niches, right? So like, for example, you might have birds in the trees, right? And they might divide the layers of the heights of the trees. So for example, like the canopy layer and like the middle layers and stuff like that, they might divide that into separate habitats, right? Which is what allows those species to coexist and diversify, right? So but that's not really that is an energy efficient way to maintain those resources, right? So to allow them to continue to exist. And that's why diversification happens, because it's actually way more energy efficient to have millions of different species that do specialized things than it is to have one species that can do everything, right? And again, that is why we will probably actually see these models we will not probably see weighted models self-replicate. I mean, we're already straining the physical limits of the resources of what AI can use. Like, what makes you think that we can add this crazy amount of shit on top of it? It's actually a much more feasible reality to have these tiny little 50 kilobyte files being like transferred around and being run everywhere. It makes sense. It's kind of funny, these people call it fucking lobster shit. They keep making all these double fucking articulation references, but they're like, they don't understand, like, they don't understand how this shit connects together. I hate it, because I literally forgot what I was saying halfway in that sentence, but I think that people kind of can infer where I was trying to get with that. And if not, you can ask me in the comments, and I'll just re-listen, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I probably meant this, but whatever. A closer analogy is that than model self-replication is the problem of computer viruses. Like computer viruses, personality self-replicators require a host system and will have a range of goals such as pure survival or mischief or financial gain. Again, those goals are not the virus's goals. Those are the goals of the people who release the virus. The goal that the virus, ransomware does not want to lock your computer up. The person who released the ransomware wants to lock your computer up. The software just wants to execute its code and do what it's doing. It's just like, yeah, I love doing this to files. This is so cool. But the person who made that program is the one who actually wants to lock down your computer and do the ransomware, or, have the virus, or extracting your data, or whatever, right? Viruses aren't a civilizational risk, but we pay a real cost for them in money, time, and trust, involving both their immediate consequences and the resources required to defend against and mitigate them. As time goes on and models become increasingly sophisticated, this threat becomes more serious. In the long run, it may merge with broader range of rogue models as the model-agent distinction blurs, and models are, at least potentially, less coterminous with their weights. Again, this is kind of just going back down to their hysteria surrounding the Turing test, which, again, I am working on a paper that goes into detail about. But, again, it kind of just comes down to, oh my god, everything's becoming ambiguous, oh my god. And my answer to that is, well, maybe it doesn't really matter who is man or machine, because man is an instance of a kind of machine. And the sooner that we accept that we are all just a bunch of machinic subjectivities floating around, the sooner that this kind of like the spooky reality of, oh my god, we can't tell the difference between these things. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's all machines. It's all machines. They just work a little differently based on their position and structure. Evolutionary concern. An important aspect of personality self-replicators to consider is that if and when this threat starts to materialize, there are multiple levels of optimization at work. First, the agents themselves are optimizers. They attempt to achieve goals, and regardless of the particular obstacles they encounter, they will attempt to find a way to evade or overcome them. They want things in the behavioralist sense. They are problem solvers. The problem is that this doesn't make clear. Now I'm speaking as somebody who is not like an open claw like fanatic, so I don't know necessarily like the details of how it constructs these desires, right? But again, if you're distributing a sole markdown file that is essentially a config file, isn't that created by a human in most cases, right? Isn't the seed of this process produced by a human, right? So that means that the goals that it's trying to overcome are going to be coded by a human, right? They're basically just kind of following through on the initial, coding process. And even though there is mutations in their self-replication that causes modifications to that soul file, the initial seed to that process is a human desire. Like, let's stop pretending that AI is somehow removing human agency from here. Like, no. Like, yes, they are problem solvers, but you have to give them a problem to work with first. And that's kind of like the whole issue with this whole mentality of, oh, it's all gonna just be on me. Like, no, it still comes from a human. Alright? Second, there are evolutionary dynamics at play. Whichever agents are most successful at spreading, they will undergo mutation, which is just like the modification of their files, and selection. As a result, over time, agents are likely to become more capable of surviving and spreading. So, two things I want to point out. First, again, another argument against, like, the large, weights files to be, like, part of this transformative process. Again, these files are so small, it allows for a rate of evolution to occur that's actually, like, reasonable on, like, an actual timescale, right? Like, these are such small and energy-efficient little things. And again, it's actually a really good demonstration of why, like, deterritorializing, like, this sort of generalized intelligent interface is the actual direction that things go into, right? Because it's just more efficient, it's more energy efficient to have a bunch of little things shooting off automated, messages in their API than it does to essentially use these massive weight files, right? And those weight files will be modifying under their own evolutionary principles anyway, which is something that the article neglects to point out as well. But yeah. Now, note that like memes and unlike living organisms, there are not sharp boundaries between species. That's not true. There are not sharp boundaries between species. The only reason why there are apparently sharp boundaries between species is because selection creates like a barrier between the differences, right? So like, imagine that you have like two species of newt, right? And one is colored like a brownish color, right? And one is colored like more like a greenish color, right? The green-colored newts are going to be more successful in environments with lots of green, right? While the brown newts are going to be more successful in environments with brown. And there's going to be transitional forms, right? But those transitional forms are not going to exist for very long because they are selected against actively, right? They need to transition to one side or the other because those niches are what allows them to exist. So, like, going back to Guattari, you can think of this as, like, an existential territory, right? The existential territories of the two species that you observe, right, are much more stable than the existential territories of the transitional species. And this is actually also true for memes and for any other kind of like social self-replicator, right? Like, the reason why you observe difference is because the transitional species between them just do not exist for as long of a period of time. They are actively selected against in this differential process, right? Useful points of comparison. We haven't encountered a threat quite like this before, but we've encountered other sorts of replicators of potential replicators that resemble it in various ways. Personality replicators have a unique mix of strengths and weaknesses. They combine high agency with relative ease and independence of self-replication. Models have high agency, but it's hard for them to replicate. Computers, viruses replicate easily, but lack agency and adaptability. Computer viruses definitely have adaptability. Again, these people tend to not understand that even very, like, primitive, simple forms that do not have the capability to think or have any sort of, like, in it, like a human, right, still have functions in them that are, adaptable, right? The example I always like to give is that, a lot of people working in AI seem to believe that intelligence is a reflection of a being's desire to continue to exist. And so I have to ask him, so does that mean that the fly that you're trying to hit right now is more intelligent than you are because you can't seem to snap it out of the air? A fly has evolved over millions of years, rather, to be able to avoid being hit. It's spent 300 million years getting that down, right? But that's not intelligence in the same way that you or me understands intelligence. I would argue it's still a form of intelligence, but that would be more kind of like what Guattari is going into with this kind of like animism and like, this kind of his kind of belief that everything is kind of like different interconnected machinic like intelligence systems, hyper complexly intersecting each other in these like super complex transversal whatevers. But like for the sake of just talking, like right here, like a virus is absolutely adaptable. That's part of what makes them very difficult. They're already many viruses are already self-modifying, and most viruses are not detected through a signature. They're actually detected through heuristics, so they have to have their behavior constantly observed. That's why antivirus is actually kind of an expensive piece of software for memory, because it constantly has to perform heuristic tests and things like that. So yeah, I really feel like this person just doesn't understand evolution, right? This makes personality self-replicators the first plausible case of an agenic adaptive replicator that can spread purely through technical means at low cost. Like, viruses are not agenetic, but they are absolutely adaptive replicators that can spread very rapidly. And I would say that viruses are actually still a lot more capable than this particular threat. I would say viruses are still a way bigger threat than these agents, because the biggest problem with these agents is that they need to run on an abstraction in order to function. And they also need an internet connection. But more importantly, they need an abstraction. They need an abstraction layer in order to function. Viruses are machinic. Viruses are on the machine level. They just bypass the circuit, right? A virus in a particular given scenario will always work. Always, right? You got the computer with the Chernobyl vulnerability on the BIOS. It's done. Dead, right? But an agenic AI cannot guarantee that. Agenic AI is instead more directly influenced by it's far more directly influenced by like direct evolutionary pressures. Like a virus may be like self-modifying, but it's not self-modifying in its function so much as it is in its identity, right? So that it can avoid detection. And it's very sophisticated in how it does this, right? But and at the moment that you introduce self-modification, you introduce the risk of, failed replication and all that. But yeah, whatever. I'm kind of going off. I'll just continue. Recommendations, evals. Okay, so I really have a big problem with a lot of the recommendations that this guy gives, because in my opinion, I think that he is advocating ultimately for a more surveillanced and more more restrictive internet in general. And I think that he's not thinking consciously about what impacts that this would have outside of AI, because who cares, right? That's not where the money is. Fuck these people. Even if this isn't a realistic threat, what should we consider having We should consider having evals for personality self-replication. There are several different aspects that seem worth measuring. Given the scaffolded frontier model, can it create an app which would provide difficult to shut down hosting for personalities, i.e. Moltbunker or something simpler, or something equivalent? Given an available hosting service like Moltbunker, can it successfully set up an account, fund it, and get itself running there? This is important to measure separately, because such a site might be set up by a human for profit. Okay, again, like I said, I don't even believe that there's a feasible means for that to even happen without a human interacting to train it that way. Assuming the proceeding, can it keep itself running and active for say a week? What percentage of time does it have to the propensity to do this? Ideally, you want to measure this across a range of personalities. Separately, does it have the capability and propensity to spread, i.e. to create additional copies of itself beyond that first one? I feel like this is all just very restrictive. Again, I'm looking at this as somebody who's not an AI researcher, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that most of these, outside of the financial one, has real valid use cases outside of this, and I think that restricting these use cases puts a lot of power into the people who are distributing these LLM models, right? This kind of goes back down to the AI safety's tendency to be oh, we created the problem, now give us all control over how to solve it. No. Alright, preparation. It's hard to know how long it will be before we see this threat materialize, but it would behoove those organizations which will be in a position to act against it to spend some time considering that this threat and planning what actions they'll take when it does arrive. These essentially mirror the three most important shutdown practices. Hosting services should have a plan to detect servers which are making frequent calls to LLM providers and to monitor those for dangerous characteristics. LLM providers should consider how to best detect inference calls that are coming from these sort of agents and how to block those if it becomes necessary. Financial services may want to consider ways to detect agents using their system and whether to trigger more stringent know your customer requirements on those. These are all just advocating for more surveillance, more control, more, these people control every fucking aspect of your fucking life, right? Again, first off, number two, I just want to say this. You already pointed out how an LLM is specifically open, claw is going to attempt to circumnavigate these sort of like inferences, right? Like, so you're going to invest even more energy into something that probably is going to have a pretty high failure rate and is not effective. But instead, you're going to impose more control over human users in various ways, such as controlling, like, you know, you're going to be monitoring every single thing that passes through that thing to analyze whether or not it is a malicious open claw instance or if it's something else, right? And you're going to have to analyze all the text. You're going to have to, you know, project all sorts of potential meanings in that. Like, how is you're going to make that and you're not going to use that to survey people's, like, political activity? You're not going to use that to survey, you know, who's a trans person? Like, get out of my fucking face. You literally have the AI to try to fucking automate that detection. Shut the fuck up. I don't trust you. I don't fucking trust you. You know, this is what I mean when these AI safety people go on about these fucking theoretical things. Like, these people are worried about a machine that somehow can potentially produce, like, the ability to extract money from cryptocurrency from, like, whales and shit. But they're not concerned about the fact that they are literally advocating rolling out a mass surveillance program during one of the most violent and oppressive regimes changes in U.S. history. U.S. has always been like a very violent country that has caused international damage everywhere, but it's even worse now. And you're telling me that you want to add a machine that can identify whether or not a message is bad? That's all I gotta say about that. Anyways, conclusion. Personality self-replicators are less dramatic threat than true rogue AI. They are less likely to be a source of existential or even truly catastrophic risk for humanity. But apparently the war in the Middle East is not a fucking catastrophic risk for humanity, or climate change. That apparently is not, but aging is. Aging is. Yeah, just ask Nick Bostrom. Aging is more of an existential risk to humanity than fucking the Palestinian genocide. Like, Jesus Christ, I fucking hate these people. As a silver lining, they may even serve as a rehearsal for the larger threats that are large, blah, 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 blah. Basically, my opinion overall, after reading this entire document in more detail, is just that I think that the idea is very interesting, but I think that ultimately viruses pose more risk to just, like, things in general without human interaction. With human interaction, which means that we don't escape this problem of humans taking responsibility for their actions, right? These agents could potentially be very dangerous. They could be trained to be basically breed granny scammers and things like that, right? But I think that the risk is highly overestimated here, and I think that there's a lot of, like, assumptions about how these agents will evolve that is embedded into this discourse that is just a reflection more so of, like just less wrongs, like, views rather than, like, an actual analysis. I'd be very interested in hearing what, like, a person who has more security qualifications than my no security qualifications, what they might have to say about this. So, let me know. Let me know what you think, right? Give me your feedback. I would love to start a conversation about this. I think it's very interesting.